Hello and welcome to the We're Not Experts History podcast. My name is James, as usual, and with me, as usual, is the usual Sarah. Hello, Sarah.
Hello, the usual James. How are you?
Um, Ask me again at the end of the podcast. Let's see how it goes.
Okay.
Um, what are you talking to us about today?
Today, I am talking about the Peasants Revolt of 1381,
Oh,
which
interesting.
happened
Okay.
in England, for those of you that don't know. But so, England, mid to late 1300s. We've got a land of hills, sheep, and a lot of fed up peasants because, as you can imagine, this was before Wi-Fi and central heating, so life was tough for people. You've got your back-breaking labour, and you've got the English weather, and as I said, you got no Wi-Fi, so it's hard. Times are tough, and during the 1300s, we've had a few quite significant events that have impacted people massively. The first one being the Black Death, which happened in 1348 until 1350. I won't go into too much detail about that because that is a subject for another episode. But basically, the Black Death came along, wiped out half the population in one fell swoop. And initially, it did lead to some more positive things, less people to feed for a start, because a lot of people
Yeah.
died. But it also led to a labour shortage, which meant that peasants for a time were more valued, and wages actually did increase for a short while after the plague, but by 1351 wages had been cut again. And yeah, so that upset a lot of people, and because we still had a continued labour shortage, peasants started to ask for better pay again and better working conditions. And it didn't go down very well. The upper classes basically said, well, no, and they started to pass even more laws to freeze the wages. So not only have they reduced the wages, they're freezing them at that lower rate. So clearly nothing says thank you for surviving the plague like a good old-fashioned pay cut.
It's a great way to show them how much they're valued.
Yeah, which isn't very much, clearly.
Evidently.
So yeah, you've got the plague, or the Black Death, which was the plague, one of the plagues. You've got the labour shortage. You've also got the 100 Years' War, which is still going on. So England and France are still not getting along, and as a result of this, King Richard II's government, they need a lot of money to fund this war. And who better to try and squeeze some extra cash out of is the peasants, the people that don't have much to start with.
They cut their wages and then ask for more money.
Yes, basically. So
Yeah, brilliant.
enter the poll tax, which was a flat rate that everyone had to pay, even if you had a turnip to your name, you had to pay this poll tax. So yeah, not good. And then on top of that, as if that wasn't enough, you've got serfdom, which basically serfdom was the medieval version of a really bad job with no benefits, no days off, and no chance of quitting. Basically, you're born and congratulations, you're automatically hired as a serf. So this would have been for a majority of the population. And a serf is fancy medieval speak for a peasant with just no rights. And the idea of it was you worked the land, which was owned by a lord, and in return you got, well, permission to keep breathing, really. They didn't have wages as in like what we have today, like a salary. Instead of cash, they were paid in the form of being allowed to live on the land, grow some food for themselves, and not be kicked off the land. And in return, they had to work a chunk of the week on the Lord's land, fixing stuff. They'd have to pay taxes, which would be in the form of crops or chickens. And on top of that, they'd occasionally get dragged into war and various ditch digging projects. So they weren't technically slaves, they couldn't be bought or sold, but they were tied to the land. So if the Lord sold the estate, you went along with it. So you were kind of part of the estate.
Your property, basically.
Yeah. So it was like being stuck in the world's longest unpaid internship. So you're working for free, you're getting yelled at, you're not getting treated very well. And, you know, these guys didn't want much. All they really wanted was a bit of freedom, a bit of land, maybe a pint, just the simple stuff. So
a little bit of freedom, yeah.
Yeah, so by 1381, you've got the country's basically made up of plague survivors, overtaxed villagers, and angry farmhands, and they've got nothing to lose. So it's all simmering. It's like a big simmering pot of anger. And when the king's collectors started to come around asking for more money, then the Pitchforks came out and it all kicked off.
I was going to say something must have triggered this.
Yes, it did.
It's got to be something from one state of affairs to the other.
Obviously,
probably not a lot.
No, I mean, obviously it's all been simmering for a while. But it really kicked off 30th of May 1381. There was a royal official called John Bampton. He was a justice of the peace, and he rolled into town to sniff out unpaid taxes, and he basically set up shop in Brentwood like he owned the place, and he started to summon people from nearby villages, which was Fobbin, Corringham and Stamford-le-Hope, basically to say, where's the money? And I should point out that this is Essex. We're in Essex.
Yeah.
I forget to
just
mention
down the road
that.
from where we are, yeah.
Yes. I always assume because we live in Essex, everyone lives in Essex, but they don't. So enter Thomas Baker. So he's the rep for Fobbin. He wasn't having it. And he basically said, well, we've coughed up enough cash. We're not giving you any more money. Bampton wasn't particularly happy with the sass, and he tried to have him arrested, and that was a bad move because things then got a bit punchy, and yeah, word of the scuffle spread, and before you knew it, the whole region's up in arms, and even Kent now are involved. And
yeah. And I knew somewhere along the line it was Kent and not just Essex, so we like to share the blame.
Yes, we started it, but Kent then got involved, and then you've got Wat Tyler. So when people think of the Peasants Revolt, everybody will think of Wat Tyler. He was like a key figure in the Peasants Revolt, and he was a rebel leader who ended up in charge for I don't know what reason really, maybe because he had a working brain. He was basically a mix between a union leader and that one guy in the pub that convinces everyone to storm the kebab shop at 2 a.m. He was that kind of character, or that's how I imagine him to be anyway.
I wonder if he had some military background, but
that's very possible. Not much is known about him, but there is some talk that he potentially originates from Essex, not Kent, and that he was an archer. But again, this is all speculation. We don't actually know this as fact. But tagging along with him, there was a John Bull. He was a radical priest, and he liked to stir things up with some spicy sermons. So he was basically like your medieval hype man. So we've all inspired by these sermons and with Wat leading, a big number of the Kentish rebels decided to march to London and confront the upper classes. And not to be outdone, the Essex rebels, having already kicked off with the scuffle in Brentwood, decided, well, this is fun. We're going to join in. And they decided they were going to come to London. And basically you've got farmers, blacksmiths, brewers, people that just hated mornings, decided we're going to come along for the ride. And the result was you've got thousands of peasants rolling into London armed with weapons, weapons being things like sticks, battle axes, maybe some old swords and bows, demanding lower taxes, more freedom, and most importantly, they just want to give the upper classes a bit of an earful because they've had enough. They've had enough. So off they go to London. They reach Blackheath, which is just southeast of the capital. This was around the 12th of June, and some representatives of the royal government, they met them there. They tried to persuade them to, look, just go home, which didn't work. King Richard II, now he's only 14 at the time of this, so he's only, we would consider him today as a child, but I guess then he would have been considered as an adult. But he knew this was coming. He received word of the rebel force, I think, a couple of days previously. So he's already hiding out in the Tower of London with his mum, hiding under her skirts and probably reconsidering his career path. But fair dues to him, when it became obvious that the problem wasn't just going to go away, he did agree to ride down and meet the rebels at Mile End on the 14th of June. So that was how the initial meeting ended up taking place at Mile End, and it's a bit uncertain who actually spoke for the rebels at Mile End. I don't know if it was Wat Tyler initially, it may have been, but the demands were put across, and the king basically agreed to everything. He said, you can have reform, you can have freedom. Crowd went wild. It looked like the revolution was going to win the day, with the king agreeing to everything.
Yeah, that seems like I wonder if his mum sent out just tell them they can have what they want, just to get rid of them.
Just there's no way. Shut them up. Yeah,
there's no way they're going to completely agree to a complete change how everything works and how they're getting rich.
Of course not.
No chance.
No, too good to be true. But
exactly.
So while he's playing diplomat, some rebels had stormed the Tower of London, and they ended up killing Simon Sudbury, who was the Lord Chancellor, and Robert Howes, who was the Lord High Treasurer. They were hiding in the tower, and they basically were both killed. And they were actually about to execute the future Henry IV, who was also hiding out in the tower. But they were interrupted by one of the guards, and he escaped with his life. But imagine how differently that could have turned out. So just goes to show.
Well, they would. Their end would have probably been a lot harsher.
Yes. So naturally, this didn't go down very well. The king is now really, really cheesed off. Like he's had enough now. He's like, I'm trying to play nice here, and you're just taking advantage of my good nature. So he's gone back to one of his royal houses in Blackfriars, and he appoints a new military, or he appoints a new chancellor, a military commander called Richard Fitzallen. He's the Earl of Arundel. Don't know if I said that
Arundel,
right.
Yeah.
Arundel. So he replaces Sudbury as chancellor, and he and the king together make plans to regain an advantage over the rebels.
I wonder if those plans would have been quite as violent if the rebels hadn't have stormed the tower and killed a couple of people and threatened to kill a future monarch.
Yes, I don't think they helped their cause by doing that. Because essentially, the king was trying. All right, he probably didn't intend to stick to everything he said, but he was attempting to make negotiations, and in the meantime you've got these bunch of rebels causing havoc while you've got the sensible party trying to negotiate, and then but anyway, they obviously they didn't help themselves by doing this, but what's done is done. So roll on to the 15th of June 1381, and another meeting took place, and this is what is considered as the final stand of the Peasants Revolt, and it took place at Smithfield, which is just outside the walls of London. And back then Smithfield was an open field, so it was used for markets, fairs and occasional executions. And the meeting started awkwardly. Now, Wat Tyler was present at this meeting, as far as reports say, and he had some very bold demands. He wanted the end of serfdom, he wanted free land, he wanted full pardons for the rebels, essentially a social revolution. But he had an attitude with him. He was in full swagger mode when he turned up. And accounts say that he was very insolent. He refused to dismount his horse. He even asked for a drink of water mid-meeting, which in the presence of the king was considered quite bold. And depending on whose account you're reading, whose highly biased account you're reading, I should say, things allegedly came to a head when either Wat insulted the king's party or he reached for a weapon. I'm not really sure. It's not really clear which one it was. But at that point, the Lord Mayor of London, Sir William Walworth, he decided, well, I've had enough of this dude. He's doing my head in. So he stabs him. And with the help of a royal squire, Wat is stabbed, I assume more than once, and he tries to escape, but he collapses, and later on he's beheaded. Whether he's already dead at this point, I don't know, but he would have been dead after that. So ultimately, Wat Tyler's finished, so not one of his better days. And the king's then pulled a bit of a sneaky one. He rides up and he says, well, I'm your captain now. And the rebels, they're now leaderless, bit confused, don't really know what's happened. And most of them just went home at that point. They kind of thought, well, that's that. Didn't really work. And off they went. They went home. But not all of them went home. Not all of them.
I suppose most of them would have thought, well, we've followed Wat Tyler here and he's gone now, so
what do we do now?
We've got no idea what to do. The safest thing you do is try and get home. Yeah.
Yes.
Apart from a few who, might have a little bit of training or are just that arrogant to think that they can still push this through.
Yes. So a significant rebel group, so probably a few hundred to a few thousand, they retreated to Billericay in Essex, which was a major hotspot of rebellion back then. Whether this was to make a last stand or just to seek safety in numbers, I'm not really clear, or it's not really clear. Some probably did want to carry on with the fight. You know, the blood's up and they're angry and they've already committed a few murders in London and they're like, right, we want to carry on. Some were probably just waiting for the royal promises to be fulfilled, which wasn't going to happen.
No chance.
It was never going to happen.
No.
So the Crown, on the other hand, they're not feeling particularly patient after all this drama. So orders were given to hunt down these remaining rebels who had scattered, and a force of royal troops, which possibly would have included knights and trained soldiers, was dispatched. And meanwhile, the rebels, not all of them, as I said, they would have scattered across the southeast, but a big number of them were hiding out in Nosey Wood in Billericay, which was a thick forest with a good cover and decent ambush potential. But what you have to remember is that these guys, they might have been full of bluster, but they weren't a seasoned army. The group mainly consisted of farm labourers and local artisans, and they just had makeshift weapons like sticks and old blunt axes. And so when the royal forces caught up with them, and this was the 28th of June, they didn't stand much of a chance. And fighting was brutal and it was fast, and many of them were just cut down where they stood. And anyone that survived they were either captured or they fled.
Yeah, I know, obviously, because it's local. I know that they dug a few defences, trenches and bits, and then they also chained carts together in the hope
Right.
of creating a defensive line, and it didn't work.
No.
So they reckon at least 500 were killed that day, and they were all buried down the road in Great Burstead.
Oh, okay.
And then a few that got away went to Colchester in the hope of stirring another uprising. It didn't work, so they then went on to Sudbury, where they found a load of royalists, and then they fled into Huntingdon and just tried to keep their heads down.
Yeah, because even after this initial battle, so this is the Battle of Billericay, as it was referred to, those that hadn't been killed or captured at that point, you know, the king was still out for their blood, and he was still dishing out punishments, executions, imprisonment. So the sensible thing was just keep your head down and just let it blow over, because you weren't in the king's good books if you had any involvement in this. So after all that hype, the revolt was basically crushed. It was done, but it did scare the nobility, and it did plant some seeds for future change. Obviously, nothing happened overnight, but the idea that pheasants, like birds,
Peasants Revolt,
peasants could rise up and almost succeed. That idea that did stick around. So, although it didn't exactly end with a workers' utopia, obviously Wat Tyler got stabbed and his head chopped off, the king went back on all his promises, and serfdom wasn't abolished immediately, but it wasn't all for nothing. It does still matter, and it did implicate a lot of change.
Yeah, I was going to say, we must enjoy some freedoms or
that we wouldn't have had. Yeah, definitely.
From this, yeah,
definitely. Like most events in history, they'll have knock-on effects, and even if it's hundreds of years later, you'll still see that. But the first thing is that the peasants were getting ideas. So for the first time, ordinary people who were basically the backbone of the country, they started to realise that they weren't just property, and that the idea that social order, it wasn't set in stone and it could be challenged, which was a big deal to have that realisation. And this in turn, it got the nobles really nervous. So to be fair, the revolt, it scared the living daylights out of the ruling classes, because they suddenly realised that, oh, we've been pushing these people, we've been hammering down on them, and they suddenly thought this probably isn't a good idea. Yeah. So as I said, although it didn't lead to instant reformation, it did plant that seed, and it resulted in serfdom eventually dying out. So it didn't go immediately. Like all things, it didn't suddenly change overnight, but it did give it a serious knock to the knees. And over the next 100 years or so, the system just faded, and wages rose, and peasants gained more freedom. And the idea that they were people, not property, really started to take root. So, in a sense, it really showed what collective action could do, and it's a reminder that when enough people get fed up, whether they're peasants or royals or whatever class, they can really shake the system. So even though they didn't win at that point, you could class it as a non-win, they still made history just by showing up and trying. And although it didn't end at that stage with happy peasants skipping through the fields and, you know, free as birds, it did mark a turning point. And
I was going to say, obviously, they played the long game.
They did. Wasn't their intention. Yeah. They wanted change now.
They wanted it immediately, but which was never going to happen.
No, but you know, it did mark a turning point, and it started with tax, a preacher, and a man named Wat.
Yeah, I was going to say I'm old enough to remember poll tax riots, and I seem to remember that those riots were enough for that poll tax to be abolished.
Yeah, so it does work. So basically, yeah, if you're not happy, just start a riot and don't do that. Do not take my word for that.
I can't condone that.
No, I didn't say that.
Absolutely outrageous.
But
well, I've recorded proof of us says otherwise.
So we can edit that bit out. But
who's doing the editing?
True.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that, in a nutshell, is the Peasants Revolt. So basically, it was a riot, which flopped, kind of, but still brought around huge change over time.
Not immediately, but
over time. It's like you say, playing the long game.
Yeah, obviously, probably a lot of the freedoms we enjoy today have its seeds in the Peasants' Revolt.
Yes, I would agree with that, most definitely.
And the Pheasants' Revolt, of course.
Yeah, we mustn't forget the Pheasants' Revolt. We'll have to do that one next time.
Yeah, you will. You're right. Yeah. But anyway, thank you for that.
No problem. You're most welcome. Hope you enjoyed it.
And yeah, I managed to stay awake. I was quite pleased.
Well done. Pat on the back for you.
Very kind. So, thank you for listening. Please remember that we're not experts. We're just two history fans mulling our way through subjects we find interesting. And we hope you find them interesting too. Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you for listening to the We're Not Experts History Podcast. You can find us on Instagram at We're Not Experts Podcast, where you will also find our link tree on the profile page. If you enjoyed the podcast, please give us a like on whichever app you listen to and share with your friends.